was the forecast. So I'd say from a curbside collection perspective, we've come close to that target. We haven't exceeded it. And if there were municipalities that have gone above it, I know there's some municipalities that are struggling with 50%. So I think it was a good target, and it was a great target to strive for, and we are where we are.
So going forward, would you adopt the same sort of target, or would you increase that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's something that we still have to discuss as a group, as an N6 group. I know through the master plan exercise, the region is looking to move towards zero waste, and there are targets set within the master plan. And if we look at different options for various increased reduction opportunities, those would also have to be factored in. I think one thing that's very important to recognize, both with this N6 contract and with the N6 partnership as it stands, each municipality is pursuing various reduction or diversion opportunities. So, for example, with the discussion we just had on the clear bags, all the N6 partners are watching our experience and would then piggyback on that based on their experience. They're also implementing things that we're watching, Aurora being one of the partners, watching them and learning from their experiences. So what we're trying to do is leverage each municipality's experiences to then roll out these programs and basically move the programs forward in a more efficient way. So that 65% I would have to say has to go up to, just from that perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Simonauskas. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. Just something that occurred to me. This is a very long contract, or at least the last one was. It was 10 years. The new one will be about that length of time.
Mr. Simonauskas.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are discussions to look at a shorter term, something more akin to what the vehicles would be, the life of the vehicle would be. So it could be as short as, say, 7 years. That is still being discussed, and it's really just looking at what the appropriate duration is based on whether it's the fleet or whether it's current trends in the industry. The 10-year term is up for discussion.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm also guessing that, I'm assuming that there's a clause in the contract that will deal with growth of each municipality, and the costs are increased along with the growth of the community.
Mr. Simonauskas.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the current contract is a by weight contract. So as the community grows, the tonnage increases, and the cost would be recovered based on those tonnage cost per ton collected. And the contracts also typically have an escalation clause that would allow them to increase their rate based on a factored percentage of energy costs as well as consumer price index costs.
So through you, Mr. Chair, as a follow-up, so if the region or the province mandates that we have to deal with post-construction waste or textile fiber waste, that would all be taken care of. It's not in the contract at the moment, I'm guessing. So how would that be taken care of?
Mr. Simonauskas.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can only work with the regulatory environment that we have in place today. The contract does, a good example is when LCBO started to collect their glass. That took a lot of weight out of the blue box stream, which affected the contract because the contractor was anticipating that weight would be present. So there are things that can change, with the regulations or with the programs that might influence the contract, and we have to basically just deal with them as we may. The contract itself does allow for those kind of negotiations, and there's process available to allow us to move through that.
Thank you. That sounds reasonable.
Maybe if I could just direct a question to Mr. Marr. I would assume with contracts like this, if there's a significant change, be it legislation or something else, there's typically a clause called a force majeure, which allows you to reopen the contract. Would there not be?
To you, Mr. Chair, yes, generally that's correct.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. On to item 4, which was pulled by Councillor Abel. Councillor Abel, would you move the recommendation? Yes. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Maracas. Councillor Abel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and I just wanted to ask if this is related to the incineration that we're going to be moving forward onto?
Mr. Simonovskis?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. This report is basically providing some information on the current commissioning that the region's going through, and I just thought it timely to inform council of this commissioning period and just provide some information on the facility itself.
Councillor Abel?
And that was basically just my thought. When is this due to come in use to be employed by us?
Mr. Simonovskis?
So through you, Mr. Chair, from my conversation with the regional staff, they are currently diverting waste to the facility that would be commensurate with the amount that they would expect to run on a regular basis. There is a 2-month commissioning period, so right now, if there's any commissioning issues, then they would have to stop that flow of waste. But the intent is that the commissioning period is successful, then that waste stream will continue to go to the facility. So essentially, it's operational right now with the condition that if commissioning issues arise, they would stop the flow of waste.
Now, this is waste that we don't divert through recycling and through the green bin. And in lieu of the old way of putting it and packing it and sending it down to a landfill, this is the end result of all of our, apart from the electronic waste and other such, but this is basically containing what I was talking to about earlier. So I just thought I would pull it because it's information that's valuable as we go along educating ourselves about how we dispose of our waste. We do divert, and what we don't, we use to waste to energy, and it's basically relatively close, and we're not using landfills.
Thank you, Councillor Abel. Councillor Marcus?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Simonovskis. Do you have a time frame when we would get to that 90%?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the 90% diversion?
Yes.
Almost immediately, actually. The region was very happy to say that between an incineration process they're using in a U.S. facility and this facility, basically 100% of our waste would be dealing with this type of treatment. So it's almost immediate. It's assuming the commissioning is successful.
Okay, and then just as a follow-up, through you, Mr. Chair, when the trucks back up and dump the stuff, dump the garbage, what's the process within the facility? What do they do with that garbage?
Mr. Simonovskis?
Through you, Mr. Chair, what I might suggest, and if it's basically gone through an incineration process, but there is a really well-done video. If council would wish to Google York Durham Energy from Waste, and there's a video that describes the entire process from dump to incineration through to final recovery, and I can forward a link if that would be helpful.
I guess just to follow, my quick question and quick answer that I was looking for was more of, do they sort through the garbage that gets put there?
Mr. Simonovskis?
No, it goes into a big pit, and then it's picked up with a kind of an overhead crane.
And it just goes straight into the burners?
Correct. There is opportunity to catch anything that might look, if there's a fridge or something that's totally inappropriate, but they're not going to be looking for batteries or small things because the operation is the scale is too large for that kind of a sort.
Okay.
Councillor Marcus, that's okay. Councillor Gartner?
Thank you. Following up on Councillor Mrak's question, maybe concern, through Mr. Chair to Mr. Simonovskis. It says on page 3, just above link to strat plan, about educating the community so that they can appreciate the need to eliminate toxic and inappropriate waste materials from garbage so that the new facility is able to operate as efficiently as possible. So they're not, but from what you've just said, all of the garbage is just getting dumped. Nobody is going through the garbage. So I don't understand how that fits in.
Mr. Simonauskas.
Certainly through Mr. Chair. So this speaks to, again, that social responsibility. The region does have a promotional campaign that they'll be publishing through the various communities to just increase awareness around that social responsibility. So if you're recognizing that this waste is now going to our neighbor community for incineration and treatment, that we had to do our part.
Thank you. Follow up. I wasn't clear. Apologize. The last sentence basically is so that the new facility is able to operate as efficiently as possible. I don't understand what that has to do with the efficiency of operation if nobody is going to be checking the garbage for particular materials.
Mr. Simonauskas.
Certainly through you, Mr. Chair. So the facility's been designed to properly treat the incineration off gases from the process. There's very elaborate scrubbers and treatment facilities for that waste stream. However, and everyone recognizes, and we have the same challenges within the wastewater streams, is that by keeping the waste out of the system, it makes it easier to process it at the other end. So it's no different than, say dumping your medications down the toilet. They have to be then taken back out of the system at the treatment plant. So it's that same kind of social awareness to say, okay, the facility can manage contaminants, but it just will operate. It's one less thing to have to deal with if it's not in this stream, and then we don't have to worry about taking out those contaminants through those scrubbers and those other treatment facilities prior to discharge to the environment.
Thank you. I think I better watch the video. I'm not quite. Can you just talk through you, Mr. Chair, just talk about the terminology for the moment? So it's energy from waste, which is burning, which is incineration. It's just incineration? Is that what we're talking about?
Mr. Simonauskas.
Through Mr. Chair, yes, it's a very efficient process for incineration, and then the heat generated from that process is used to create steam, which is then used to generate electricity through turbines. So it's very similar to any other sort of a thermal process where you have turbines used to generate electricity. They're suggesting that the power from this facility would be sufficient to operate between 10 and 12,000 homes. So it just gives you a sense of the scale of the operation as well.
And then the last question would be about the quality of the air that comes out of the incineration stack.
Mr. Simonauskas.
And there will be residents who are going to want to know this. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there was a very extensive environmental assessment done for this project, very extensive monitoring, very extensive protocols that were put in place by both municipalities, by both regions. There has been a very active community engagement group that's been meeting regularly throughout this process, throughout the construction of the project as well as prior to design phase. And there's very, very rigorous testing and monitoring of the emission gases of all the systems. And this is part of the commissioning process as well, so to make sure that all the systems are working properly before they commit to full-blown operation.
Thank you. I think it's a great idea.
Any further questions from council? Mr. Simonauskas, I just have one question. It does indicate that the facility will process up to 140,000 tons. And from what I've read, the majority of that will come from Durham region. So I think I read that the York region will contribute about 30% of that 140,000 tons, which certainly doesn't equate to the level of garbage that York region produces. And you've already spoke to someone who gets sent to another facility. Is there capacity to increase the tonnage over time? Is this sort of an initial phase and then they'll slowly ramp it up to increase it to greater levels, or are you aware?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of what the split will be if that diversion between the region or Durham and York could change. So I think if anything, if council is looking for specific information, it'd probably be more appropriate to have regional staff come in and provide specific information on the overall waste stream management, both U.S. and Canadian operations, as well as this operation specifically with their partnership with Durham.
Thank you, Mr. Simonauskas. Councilor Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, does York have any plans to handle their own incineration looking down the road? I mean, are we always going to rely on our neighbors or moving it? I think the other incineration is east of us towards Peterborough, or where does it go?
Mr. Simonovskis?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe it's a U.S. facility, the second incinerator. It's an existing U.S. facility. That's what I understand. And as far as the long-term plan that's just been adopted through regional council, there is no plan that I'm aware of for an incineration or any other type of processing within York Region itself.
So I guess my comment is we're going to have to rely and probably be vulnerable to what market and external factors rather than assuming and taking care of our own waste in the long term. And that may be an issue if the region hasn't forecasted or done anything. So I'm not, I mean, we'll have to deal with what we do, I suppose. But again, I guess my comment is that waste will be a responsibility of municipalities somewhere down the road. Well, it always will be, but if we don't find a sustainable method, it could be a big pressure financially on the municipality.
Just, if I understand, just for clarification, this is a joint facility between the region of Durham and the region of York, both contributed to the funding and the construction of it, even though it is in Durham, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Well, then I got the impression that only 30% of the incineration is from York. Does that 30% cover all our waste in York right at this time?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, it doesn't, but the region has arrangements with other facilities. And basically, the buy-in for this facility between York and Durham was an arrangement that was developed over the last, I think, 7 years since they've been working with this environmental assessment. And they've basically purchased the capacity that they forecast that they were looking for. It's no different than, say, our wastewater facility, which is in Durham, or some of the other facilities, say, in Peel for water supply. There are arrangements that are created based on forecast demands and sort of a larger portfolio of how they're going to manage, whether it's waste or wastewater or water.
I can appreciate that there are arrangements, but the arrangements for the waste for incineration is across the border. That's significant looking down the road. I mean, who knows what arrangements may be coming down the road. I mean, it may be the state may say we're not going to take any. We're at capacity and we have to look after ourselves. So I mean, I'm just saying, we saw that with the landfills where Toronto had landfills, they didn't know where to put it, and then they found short-term areas. So it kind of rings an alarm bell for me if we're moving a lot of our waste where we could do it to Durham. That makes sense because it's relatively close. Moving it down for incineration to United States, going across borders, tariffs, et cetera, energy to get it there, that's not as good as what we have arranged in Durham. But we're nowhere near handling our capacity at this time.
Do you want me to direct a question, or is it just a comment? And I certainly think Mr. Simonovskis' suggestion of inviting someone from the region to present and talk in a little bit more detail would be a good one to take under consideration for future. Councilor Maracas? Nothing? Councilor Gardner for the second time?
Following up on what you've just said, how can we make that happen? Through you to Mr. Simonovskis or Mr. Mayor?
You just asked the nice regional rep.
Mr. Simonovskis, can we leave that with you? Thank you.
Oh, I didn't get to answer that.
Seeing no further comments or question, all those in favor of receiving for information? Opposed? That item's carried. Now, who pulled this one? Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move that report LLS 15-011 be received, and that the composition of the Council of the Corporation of Town of Aurora be changed from 9 members to 7 members, comprised of 1 mayor, who shall be the head of council, and 6 councillors. That the change in the composition of council come into force following the next regular municipal election, in accordance with the provisions of subsection 217-3 of the Municipal Act 2001, and that the necessary bylaw be brought forward at the February 24th, 2015 meeting of council, sorry, I guess it's March 24th, for the corporation of the town of Aurora from 9 members to 7 members, comprised of 1 mayor, who shall be the head of council, and 6 councillors.
For council's clarification, that is the alternative number 4. And if you use the add-on, it'll have the correct dates for everybody. Would you care to speak to it?
I'll
We
wait for
do have a
seconder.
seconder, actually. Do I have a seconder? Mayor Dahl seconds it.
So although we did not receive the necessary members of the public to come out, I do think that with the votes cast in that direction, we have a very strong indication of what the residents in our community would like to see as the composition of council. As a 2-time 8th place finisher in the elections here in Aurora, it's not about what I think works best for me, but I think it's about what works best for our residents. And ultimately, I think the residents have a right to choose how they'd like to be represented. And they spoke very clearly about how they're represented, in my view. In other people's view, maybe because we didn't reach that 50% threshold, you know, there might not be the strength to require the change or to want to move towards the change. But ultimately, this is something that I brought forward because I believed in, and I don't think that where I ended up in the election should dictate how, you know, any change in sentiment. And so this continues to be something I believe in, and so I am very much in favor of it, and I look forward to hearing other comments around the table.
Would other members of council care to speak to the motion that's on the floor? Councillor Kim. Councillor Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really commend Councillor Peary for bringing this forward because although it didn't reach the minimum threshold requirement to move forward, a significant amount of people did decide to choose in this direction. So I commend Councillor Paul for bringing this forward. I'm in disagreement, respectfully. I think it's short-sighted, quite frankly. I did some research, and I was reading one consultant view where from a wide guideline, they said a municipality or district over 50,000 should include 1 mayor and 8 councillors. A municipality or district less than 50,000 have a mayor and 6 councillors, and a smaller town or village have a mayor and 4 councillors. I thought that was interesting. I think we need to, I would submit to everyone that we should, the public needs to focus not so much on the cost of elected officials, but the quality of the elected officials. I think people need to do their homework and know who they're voting for and into office, and not the price or the cost, because I suspect that when people we're contemplating that question, they were recognizing the immediate cost savings, A, or B, lack of knowledge for the amount of work involved that goes into being a member of council. And I think myself being a new member of council, I've been floored by the amount of reading and knowledge and catching up. And I have a great respect for past councillors and mayors who served in this capacity. Or C, they do not value the role of council members, period. Considering that I think yesterday the library said that the cost of the library is $57 per resident, and I calculate for the total cost of council is $5.02 per resident. So I think they're getting value for for the 8 people, $57 versus $5. So from a pure cost perspective, we're not talking about a lot of money here for what you get. Coming from the financial services area, I know a lot of people like to, cheapen out thinking that an investment advisor is expensive. I think they typically charge 1% by the amount of assets. A research report I read last year from Investor Economics stated that those who had investment advisors, their returns were quite, the performance of their portfolios was a lot better than those who did it themselves. And I liken that to this situation in that people want to do it themselves or to do it with less. And I would argue that, the more resources you put into your town and council, the more performance and the better quality of life that you're going to have. I think when you have 6 versus 8 or even 4, the direction of the town and what the makeup of the town and what the town will look like in 10 years will be vastly different. I just want to put that out there, and I believe that if it's just a cost issue, I think the town is getting good value for 8 councillors. Thank you.
I'll just say 8 councillors and a mayor. Councillor Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am in disagreement with the motion that's on the floor currently as well, for a number of reasons. One is, we have no indication as to why residents voted to, albeit not the requisite number as required to make this binding, but we don't know why they voted to reduce it to 6. We think that it's for costs, and that would be the most logical explanation, because obviously someone goes, oh, well, if they have 8 and 6, perfect, that's got to be a savings, so tick. That's what we think. We don't know that. So it's hard to get at what what the mind of the electorate was, and maybe that's the fault of the question itself. But it remains that this isn't a binding. This is not a binding referendum, and it should be definitely taken into consideration the results. But 64% of 32% of the eligible electors voted for it. So in the grand scheme of things, a majority of eligible voters didn't. I know that's semantics, but I'm sticking with it. And I'd just like to point out as well, if we reduce to 6, what does the town gain from that? Apart from, what is it? What's the amount? 70 grand? I don't know. 71,600 a year? I mean, a fairly small amount of money, but when you think about what you lose having 2 less bodies at this table, when it's talking about populating committees, we're having problems populating committees we have with 8 currently. And you take 2 people out of that, and it gets to a point of you're either gonna turf committees and not run them, or you're gonna have councillors sitting on 3 committees, 4 committees in some cases, maybe. So to me, that and still most of us or some of us still work other jobs, and you're trying to attract people who are interested in public service, but it's a part-time job, and you can't live off a councillor's salary, and there was no indication as to making it full-time. So then you're having reduced effectiveness for $70,000 in savings, but who are you attracting to run? There has to be an incentive other than public service for people to do it, because if you have 2 jobs, and now we would be asking for those people who are going to run for council to do more for the same amount of money, I might add as well. We're not looking at, there's no indication of increased salaries or making it full time, because I imagine if the referendum question was, we'd like you to discuss reducing from 8 to 6, but we'd like to make the 6 councillors full-time, I bet you people would have said, no, I don't think we're in favor of that. But again, we don't know why they voted against it, because that wasn't on the ballot. So to me, that's why this, to me, it makes no sense. I mean, we're reducing the current council from 8 to 6. We're not changing the pay, we're not changing the amount of hours that councillors are expected to work, and most councillors, we would imagine, do hold other jobs. How are you going to attract young people who have families, who would already find it difficult to sit on council with more work? I mean, to me, that just it pushes away people that we want to bring into the electoral process and to the electoral system, as young people with families, you know. And to me, this doesn't help that. So, in that regard, I think it's misguided. And again, for 70 grand, I think, as Councillor Kim mentioned, the savings, I would rather keep the 2 councillors and the extra eyeballs on reports, the extra outlet for residents to connect with in terms of a representative for them at their legislative body. And so that's the economic side of things. I'd also like to say, and I dug up the history here. You know, this is going to be a common theme, and I hope council will indulge me over 4 years that I'm going to be pulling the history on all of this stuff. So bear with me here. Well, I can tell you, it goes back to I think Borden was prime minister, but in 1911, this town council of Aurora comprised of 6 councillors, a reeve, and a mayor, so 8 total, 8 members total. The population of Aurora in 1911 was 1,901 people. There was 1,901 people in Aurora. And yet, the town saw fit to have that many councillors. 1931, the council was made up of 5 councillors, a reeve, a deputy reeve, and a mayor, 8 total. Population of Aurora was 2,587. You see what I'm getting at here. 1951, 6 councillors, 1 reeve, 1 deputy reeve, 1 mayor, 9 total. 51 was when we went to the current of 9 total. Population in 51 was 3,358. 71, the current composition that we have today, which is 8 councillors and a mayor, so we got rid of the reeve position. Population in 71 was 13,614. And in 2015, currently we have 8 councillors, 1 mayor. The population of Aurora, I'm using the estimates, is around 62,000. Mr. Mayor, you probably know more than me about that. 62,000 people. So we have, our residents now have, councillors have more work. That's what I'm trying to illustrate. That every year, every decade, every quarter century, whatever, it gets more difficult to be a part-time council with 8 members or 9 members. And yet now we're proposing to move to 6 and the mayor, so 7 total. So right now, there's 6,888 residents per representative. And if we move to 6, it'll be 8,857. And I think that's worth noting. So we're actually making the job of councillors more time-consuming and more difficult. And we're also increasing the amount of, and we're decreasing the amount of options residents have to voice their concerns. So I was going to, the last time council was totaled 7 members, just so people are aware, was 1899, 116 years ago, and the population of Aurora was 1,590 people. So from 1911, which is where I start my figures, Aurora's population has grown by 3,161%. We have increased our council members by 1, or 12.5%. And for a comparison, the federal population of Canada in 1911 was 7,200,000. Current population, 35,300,000, that's an estimate. Percentage increase of 390%. And the House of Commons has increased its seats by 52%. So this just gives you an illustration of the trend, at least at the federal side, is to go up, more representation. And we're talking in Aurora, even though our increase was almost 10 times that, or close to 10 times that of the federal population in Canada, we're actually talking about reducing it. I don't know if I think that that's a prudent way forward. I could be shown wrong, but to me, I think that while I wouldn't say that we need to increase the size of council, I see a very difficult argument for those who say we should make it smaller. And that's my comments for now.
Thank you, Councillor Tom. Before I go back to Councillor Peary, I was just wondering if there's anybody on this side of the table who'd like to speak for the first time. I have Councillor Gartner, then Councillor Abel. Councillor Daw. No, you're done.
Well, I agree with the comments of the 2 new councillors on that side of the table. I have the same concerns that I had the last time this was discussed at the table before we put the question on the ballot. The first one was that the question there wasn't enough education with the residents about the question. If the question was not going to be specific with how it would look with 6 counselors, at least there should have been some education around that, including taking part-time counselors to full-time counselors, at which I am in favor of. And I think all new counselors, including myself, are shocked by the amount of work that needs to be done if you want to do this job well. The other reason I objected to this going on the ballot was, and in this case, if we go with the majority here, we're going with 25%, the opinion of 25% of the eligible voters, more or less. And to me, that's not good enough. Following up on something Councillor Tom said, if we are going to try and attract people to this job, and if you happen to be listening to CBC Radio a couple of days ago, there was a discussion about how do you get more women involved in the process. And by putting more work into our workload, I don't think would help that situation.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. I have Councillor Abel, then Mayor Dahl.
Well, it's a trend that we have at the table tonight, more education. I'm in complete favor of something like this. Perhaps there should be some sort of cost benefit of this. So I thought maybe if the question had been, are you in favor of reducing the number of Aurora councillors from 8 to 6 and realize a saving of $1.10 on your $3,000 tax bill, would sort of give it some sort of weight as to what we're talking about. I'm not in favor of this.
Mayor Dahl.
I'm not sure I have anything to add after Councillor Abel's comment. I just want to, again, I'll go back to the red herring of cost. I think we have to differentiate between cost and value, and I don't think we do that enough, quite frankly. And I'd also like to point out that from both a federal and provincial representation standard, it's 1 to about 125,000. So again, different setup, different support staff, I get that. But one in, the representation rate at the local level is much better. I'm quite frankly ambivalent as to whether or not we go, if we drop 2, because I don't think that's the real issue. I think the real issue, and I believe both Councillor Kim and Councillor Tom addressed it, was how do we get quality people and how do we make sure that we're making quality decisions at this table. I think that's a far more important discussion to have. And I'm not sure this discussion gets us there, but it's a help. So quite frankly, at this point, I'm ambivalent.
Councillor Perry.
Sorry, Councillor Tom, Mr. Chair, I'm not speaking through you around the table. This is technically out of order. What year did you start in when you were giving the years? And
1911.
1911. So had we gone back into history, we would have seen during the town's incorporation, not the village, but as a town in 1888, we actually had 12 members of council. And that's when we had a population of 2,100 people in town. So the numbers have fluctuated. I think if we, start looking around at different time periods, we can find numbers that justify whatever it is we're looking for. Through you, Mr. Clerk or Mr. Mark, we talk about the legislative requirements and shortcomings of putting a referendum on the ballot and refer, in terms of language.
Who would like to, Clerk or Mr. Mark?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll answer this because the clerk wasn't around when we drafted up the question on the ballot. The question has to be neutral in language. It can't suggest one favor or the other, and so that's kind of the constraint that we would have with it. We also don't have an ability to have people write in an explanation as to why they're voting or to go back and ask them follow-up questions because it is a secret ballot, regardless of whether it's a question on the ballot or choosing a councillor. So there's some restrictions. You're getting a moment in time capture with regards to a question on the ballot like that, and there are some limitations with that. We can't lead, again, as I mentioned, somebody one side or the other with regards to the question.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You know, in my view, we can sit around the table and try and rationalize the decision of the public. We can say they did it because they thought they were saving money, or they did it for this reason, or they did it for this reason. I think ultimately that does a huge disservice to our residents. We asked them a question, they responded to the question. If we want to reject their response to the question based on us not meeting the threshold, I think that's a perfectly fine and accurate and fair reason to do so. But when we start questioning why somebody might have done something, ultimately they made a choice, and it's paramount upon us as representatives of the public to be, you know, we shouldn't be questioning their choice or the rationale behind making that choice. So for me, I am still very much in favor of this. And I think that, you know, although we didn't meet the criteria, I think the residents still gave us a very strong indication of how they'd like to be represented. And again, we can talk around the table about how we think that we should be representing them, but the members of, you know, our community at large gave us an indication of how they want to be represented. And I think personally on this matter, that has more bearing on me than any of my personal feelings. So I am still very much in favor of this.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Before I go to Councillor Tom, Councillor Maracas would like to speak for the first time. If I can just get you to turn your microphone off, Councillor Tom. Councillor Maracas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure. I agree with Councillor Perry on one item out of this whole thing, and that's that for us to sit here and try to figure out what the residents and the voters were actually thinking doesn't really make any sense. But I guess, I don't know if I can ask a question of the councillor. I guess my question would be, what's his reasoning for this and his logic to have this, other than the fact that what the numbers show that didn't meet that threshold? Is there any other reasoning as far as costs, as far as, you know, like what is the reasoning to drop?
Perhaps, Councillor Perry, you could share some of your thoughts of why you brought it forward in the first place for those that weren't here for the initial discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to. When I did an investigation of how residents across Ontario were being represented, I took a large swath of the GTA, you know, a few other cities here and there, and I looked at two items. The first item was, were they represented in an award system, or were they represented in an at-large system? And the town of Aurora fell outside of what most people do. So I thought that the residents needed to have a say in how they are represented in terms of award system. In doing so, I also looked at a per capita representation from you know, the same municipalities, and you know, the town of Aurora had more representatives per capita than other municipalities. I'm just making sure I have the wording right. More representation per capita than other municipalities. And some people could say, you know, that's a better level of service. My retort on that, I guess, would be that, are you saying that other municipalities are not as well represented, and those councillors aren't doing a good job of being councillors because there are less of them for their population per capita? And I'm not prepared to say one way or the other, but we fell outside of the scope of what other municipalities were doing. So I thought we should ask the residents how they'd like to be represented. And I think at the core, you know, we make decisions for our residents, on behalf of our residents. We do our best to try and encapsulate how we think that they'd like to be represented. The residents have every 4 years the opportunity to say who will represent them. I wanted to give our residents the opportunity to say how they'd like to be represented. And so, in my view, again, the residents have very much given us an indication of how they'd like to be represented. They'd like to stay an at-large system, but they'd like to see the number of councillors drop down from 8 to 6.
Councillor Maracus, does that answer your question?
To a certain point, I guess it does. I just like to make a comment, I guess, after that. From my findings, when it comes to the to York Region and the municipalities, our neighboring municipalities, we aren't the lowest when it comes to, no, and I know you didn't say that. We're not the lowest when it comes to representation to our community. I think that, I don't know, I just don't agree with this, and I just don't think there's any purpose for this, and I just don't see a need other than saving money. But like the rest of you have all said, and I just don't want to I don't want to go through it all again. But I mean, if we save the money and we drop the 6, do we, raise the rates and we end up making more money, which you're not really saving money in the end. So I think it's just a big waste of an exercise. So I can't support this. Thank you.
Councillor Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to clarify a couple things. So in regards to what Councillor Perry mentioned about the village of Aurora town and the numbers, the reason I started in 1911 is because that's the year, or that's, I believe, when we began to go to 8 from 7. So I was indicating the difference from what we're proposing, what this motion on the floor is proposing to do, which the last time that was in action was in 1899, and I started my historical analysis from when it was increased. So I wasn't trying to pull any smoke and mirrors on that. It just made logical sense to me. Yes, we had a majority of 64%, as Councillor Gartner mentioned, of 32.82% of the residents. A majority of 32.82% of the residents decided that they were in favor of reducing council from 8 to 6. And 35 of that, 32% voted no. So I think that there were, if you somehow don't, I guess I don't want it to seem as though that if we vote no on this, that we're not representing the views of the public, because that to me is ridiculous. There's 35% of the people that voted on the question, they voted against it. So we're representing those people. In addition, if those who were proponents of reducing the size of council were very keen and there was a huge public interest in this and that, then I imagine they would have tried to galvanize enough public support to get 50% of the voters to turn out, which was not achieved. The rules of the referendum were not achieved. So it's not binding on us. So I mean, that doesn't mean that if we don't go with what the results were, that we're somehow not representing the public, because majority of the public didn't even turn out at the election. And so I think that we need more than that. And as the referendum rules noted, we needed a 50% plus 1 on the turnout for it to be binding. And I think those are in place for a very good reason, and that is so that you have a majority of the eligible electors making the choice, not a majority of a very small minority of the voters. So I think that even though we aren't, at least I'm not in favor of moving ahead with this, that does not mean that, I'm representing a segment of the public, and it might even be larger. So I just wanted to point that out again.
Thank you, Councillor Tom. I have Councillor Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I don't know that we have a cost benefit, and I would really like to understand that. I think if you had put and that's the crux of this. I see in all the alternates there isn't one to go forward with the pluses and minuses. I do note that last term, when this was first brought up, I was given some information from the last 2 times that it happened, and the council of that day, before they voted on whether to put it on the ballot or not, and in both cases, I think the council declined. Was it just a ward system? But at any rate, they had a detailed benefit and either way, which we never had. I never, during last term, had an outcry from the residents to, hey, we really have to get a handle on these councillors. You've got to reduce it, or you've got to get a ward. So it was just put on there. arbitrarily, in my mind. It was not a demand that the residents wanted. It was an initiative by Councillor Perry, and he did his research, and he put it out, and the council over the day said, put it on the ballot. I would argue that if you put on the ballot, are you in favor of reducing taxes? Almost everyone would say yes. But the cost benefits, well, but would they realize that the services would go down? I mean, that would be one of the outcomes of reducing your taxes, theoretically, would be to cut services. So you say, well, you voted to reduce taxes, so you don't have any more garbage pickup, and we're not plowing the streets, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the question, in fairness, was meant to be reduce is a very sort of economic sort of question. Put on a ballot, I would think most people would think yes, thinking that there was going to be a significant saving at the cost of their representation. So I'll just wait until the conversation's over.
Councillor Gardner, Councillor Maracas.
Thank you.
Councillor Abel.
Excuse us, Councillor Abel, we were just trying to figure out what percentage of the voters actually voted for it.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So to wrap up, I would be in favor of having a report on the cost benefits of this action before I make a vote whether to reduce it. Because to the vote, I think the vote really says that a majority were in favor of exploring the idea, although it wasn't exactly worded that way. But I would like to know the benefits versus the cost. If it's a saving of, I didn't mean to be overtly sarcastic, but it's not my style. But $1.10, it's not a significant amount of money. And if you're going to sacrifice representation that has always existed, maybe that should be part of the equation before they answer that question. That would be part of our job as a council to explore. So as it stands right now, I can't support just arbitrarily saying, okay, we're going to go down to 8, down to 6, without understanding what the implications and what exactly the outcome of that decision will make. Because we haven't even talked about that, except for the financial part. So again, to say I'm not in favor of this as it stands. I would defeat it and then perhaps ask for a report.
Councillor Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say as well that, as council and as voted officials, we're charged to make the right decision and not necessarily the most popular one. And even though we represent the population, as Councillor Abel alluded, sometimes when you don't have the information, it's all the information that we base our decisions on is available to everyone else, but because we are the fiduciaries, we are charged to read everything and know as much as we can and make the proper decision for what's best for the town. And most people, because they have their own lives, they don't have time to do all that, and that's why they voted for members of council. So again, we're charged to make the right decision, not the most popular one, and so that's why I would not be for this particular direction. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I go to Councillor Perry for the final word, I will just make a quick comment myself. The discussion's been good. A lot of different viewpoints and perspectives have been brought up. I just wanted to add one thing to it. It is budget time, and throughout the budget time, we always talk about service levels. And in my opinion, we provide a service both to the residents as well as the community. And, I see a reduction in the number of councillors as arguably a reduction in the service that we would provide to the community. It's a reduction in access. And so, I'm also not in favor of the reduction. Councillor Perry?
So I found the chart that I'd created when I first argued in favor of going to this. Ajax, population of 110, and these are old numbers, had 6 councillors. Brock, population of 11,000, 6 councillors. Burlington, population of 175 people, 6 councillors. Clarington, 85,000, 6 councillors. Georgina has 6 councillors at 43,000. East Gwillimbury only has 4 at 22,000. King has 6 at 20,000. Pickering has 6 at 89,000. Scugog is 6 at 22,000. Uxbridge 6 at 20,000. Woodford Stouffville 6 at 337,000. You know, there are examples all across the board of different municipalities with 6 members of council or less. Personally, I don't think that they're providing less levels of service to their residents because there's only 6 of them. We can talk about full-time or part-time or have that discussion, but ultimately, you know, there's representation at that number across the board, and so I don't personally believe that it would be a reduction in service levels, but I do believe that I continue to believe that this is the right way to go.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. I'll call the vote on the motion on the floor, which is alternative 4. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion fails. Would somebody care to put a motion on the floor to receive only? Mayor Daw, Councillor Gardner. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor to receive? Opposed? So noted. Our final item of the night is item 9. We do have a closed session this evening as well. And so if we could just keep that in mind as we debate this item, that we do have 2 items that we have to discuss in closed session. Mayor Daw, you pulled this. Would you care to move the recommendation?
I certainly would.
Seconder, Councillor Perry, would you care to speak to it?
I don't want to, again, I don't wish to belabor the point, but I do think it's appropriate that with York Regional Police Headquarters being in Aurora, that we support York Regional Police at the I bit my tongue earlier, so I can't speak properly, at the Police Appreciation Dinner. It's a good night. It's a way to support the Police Association and a lot of the work they do outside of what would be typical policing. So I would just certainly appreciate support from council on this.
Other comments? I just have one comment. Because it's a council meeting, which is normally televised by Rogers, and we're moving into a Monday night, which of course is Newmarket's night, is there a way to make arrangements so that it gets taped and shown on the Tuesday night? Have we looked into that? Because, I mean, there are people, you know, many thousands of people who watch us on Tuesday night, and I don't want to see them disappointed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, if this is approved, we will work with our partners, Rogers, to see about options in that respect. And as always, when we do move meetings, we actually would also web stream the council meeting on the Monday night.
I'm fine with it as long as we make some sort of arrangement to try and ensure that those that cannot come out on Tuesday night at least have access to it. Councillor Gardner?
And just as an addition, again, educating the public, letting the public know well in advance what we're doing, why we're doing it.
If there's no further discussion, I will call the vote. All those in favor of moving the meeting to Monday? Opposed? Carried. That's it. So we still have new business and general information. I will start on my right this evening. Councillor Maracas, do you have any new business or general information you'd like to bring up?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering whether this would be brought under new business or whether I need a notice of motion. I mean, I understand that that the region is looking into their sign by law when it deals with elections also, election signs, and I was hoping, I understand through you to Ms. Van Leeuwen that we won't be coming back with anything until the region finalizes theirs?
Ms. Van Leeuwen?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're wanting to coordinate a process. So their signed bylaw is currently under review, and they haven't come to any kind of conclusions, and we would like to coordinate that process.
So, thank you. So with that being said, I was just, I was wondering whether it'd be more appropriate as a notice of motion or whether it's okay here to ask our regional representative to possibly put a motion forward at the region to ask for the number of days to be set at 30 instead of the 45, which they currently have. So I was wondering if that would be more notice of motion? Okay.
I think our regional representative would like direction from council as a whole.
Thank you.
If there's nothing further, I'll move to Councillor Gartner.
Thank you. I don't remember when council had this discussion, either in the last term or the term before. It was about staff attendance at general committee meetings and council meetings. I don't know if there's the will on council, but I would just like to note that Mr. Muno was not asked any questions this evening, as far as I know. I believe Ms. Van Leeuwen spoke twice. Mr. Marr spoke once. I don't think Mr. Elliott spoke. Mr. Downey spoke by default because I asked him a question he couldn't answer. And it was Mr. Ilmar's meeting to be on the hot seat tonight. So I don't know. I'm just making the comment. I'm still not sure how I feel about it, but it doesn't please me that we have all of our directors sitting here and there really was no reason for them to be sitting here.
So are you asking us to come up with questions as we go around? No.
I'd like everybody to think about it. Do we want to look at it again?
Mayor Dahl. Deputy Mayor Abel.
I did want to congratulate the opening of the Symposium Cafe. We were in attendance, Councillor Thompson, myself, Mayor Dahl, Councillor Maracas, and it is a gorgeous restaurant, and we were given some samples of their culinary menu, and it was fantastic. So I wish them all the best of luck.
Councillor Tom. Councillor Kim. Councillor Perry. I have nothing either. And that concludes. So can I get a motion that we resolve into a closed session to consider both matters?
After adjournment.
After adjournment. Thank you, Clerk. Councillor Maracas, Councillor Abel. All those in favor? Mr. CEO, I assume that we do not need staff to stick around? No. Only Al? Perfect. Get a motion to adjourn. Councillor Peary and Councillor Tom. All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate sticking it out.